Welcome to Tucker Carlson today. So the insanity on campus really is a bottomless well. You could devote yourself entirely to telling stories of people who are crushed, trying to exercise their right of free speech. We spend our lives hearing those stories, and we try to go through them, winnow through them, to find the best, the most revealing, the most interesting. We have not, to this point, seen a story that so clearly reveals the competing worldviews here, that contains such clear statements of immutable principles we should be defending as a country, as this story does. It's the story of Professor Dorian Abbott. He's an associate professor of geophysics at the University of Chicago. He got his undergraduate degree at Harvard in physics. Like me, he has a PhD from Harvard in applied math. And he's had an amazing, that was a joke, of course, had an amazing experience over the last year. So the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, recently canceled a lecture that Abbott was about to give later this month because he was being criticized heavily on social media for his views, not even his political views, but his philosophical views. So he responded by writing an op-ed, co-authoring an op-ed in Newsweek in August that kind of laid out what was at stake. We are very happy to have Professor Abbott join us in the studio today. Professor, thanks so much.
Mr. Carlson, thank you for having me.
So what's so interesting about this, you've seen a lot of different and trust me, just given what we do, we hear from a lot of different people. I don't think I've ever seen a college professor lay out in such clear, and I will say gentle terms, as you did, what's at stake. So here's how, I want to put up a statement, I don't know if we have this for the screen, but you took the time to write out a statement of your own personal values and how you operate as a professor, a teaching professor, and you wrote this: I practice fair admissions. I select students and postdocs on the basis of scientific ability and promise, and I do not discriminate against any applicant based on anything else, period. I encourage freedom of expression and the creative exploration of ideas in my group.
That's exactly right. And I value diversity.
Yes.
I've advised a number of people from various different races, people of color, people white, foreign students,
sure.
American students, men, women. It doesn't matter to me. But what's important to me is that everyone be given a fair chance.
Yes. But I select on the basis of scientific ability. Now, you're teaching and doing research, I think, at the highest level this country offers. I mean, based on your credentials, and we mock credentials a lot because most of them are hollow. But you know, a PhD in applied math.
It's not about credentials; it's about the product.
Well, but certain not all credentials are the same. You know what I mean? If I'm a doctor of sociology, it's a little different from having a PhD in applied math. And the promise of the hard sciences is they are quantifiable, they're measurable, that you can actually sort of determine someone's ability without reference to his race, for example.
Well, what's critical is the empirical test.
Right, exactly.
So if I develop theory, I'm a theorist. If I develop theory, I make a prediction and somebody tests it. And I'm wrong sometimes. I'm actually wrong a lot. It's okay to be wrong as long as you're being creative and coming up with new ideas.
Right. So you've summarized in your statement of values and in the sentence that you just uttered, kind of the promise of science, of education, really of a free society.
Yeah.
Nothing you're saying is controversial or different from what I assumed everyone believed growing up in this country, but it is different from what people now believe. So tell us your story. Tell us what happened, how you wound up here today.
Well, so a year ago, I was uncomfortable with how things were going on campus and off campus.
At the University of Chicago.
At the University of Chicago and in Chicago.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is I was uncomfortable with ideologies that discourage discourse. Because when you can't speak with the other side, the only recourse is violence.
Yes.
And I saw that playing out in the summer of 2020. And so that made me uncomfortable. And then on campus, I was uncomfortable with the variety of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that to me appeared to be discriminating against certain groups of people. And I felt that didn't treat them as individuals worthy of dignity and respect. And to me, that has to be the fundamentals of any moral system that we're implementing.
Yes, that individuals have value as individuals, as distinct from their group identity.
Exactly. So I think that's something that we can't abandon, even though I think it's important to help the disadvantaged people.
Yes.
So things that I do, I've taught in a program a night high school for people who've been imprisoned.
Yes.
And who are now out of prison. I regularly work with the homeless almost every week. These are very important things to me. I love working with students who are disadvantaged as well, but we have to ultimately treat every person as an individual, and we can't, I'm not comfortable at a university with saying, well, you're an Asian student, so we're not going to give you the same chance as some other student.
Right. I will say you don't have to answer or not. You sound like a believer in the way that you live. You don't have to say if you are or not, but if you are, you're a credit to whatever belief you hold. Okay, so you're expressing once again views that were the basis of our society like 20 minutes ago. So did you say any of this out loud? Apparently you did.
Yeah, so I was self-censoring for a while. I was uncomfortable, but I also understood that it was a dangerous thing to speak out on these issues. I could see what was going around. I saw how people were talking about them. And in the fall of 2020, I stopped self-censoring. And so what initially happened was I asked to give a lecture. Someone gave a lecture in an internal science seminar that we have in our department that was advocating the sort of social justice position, which is fine. People should be allowed to advocate whatever position they want. That's part of academic freedom. I asked to give a response the next week, and I was told that I couldn't give my response, which I felt that was unfair. So I recorded a short...
Let me just pause and ask, how did they explain that one side's allowed to talk?
There's always technical reasons that are given, right? So whenever anyone says anything to you, you have to understand whether they're giving you the reason or the excuse.
Right.
And in this case, the reason was that the people making this decision knew that it would be a controversial thing to express these viewpoints. The excuse was, oh, we randomly select our speaker for this internal seminar, and it's not your turn this week. So what I did was I just recorded a 5-minute video making these points and put on YouTube and shared it with the department. Now I thought YouTube is a way that I share material with my classes.
Yes.
It's a way so you don't have to send a large video file.
I'm so sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm not doing my job. What do you teach? Like, just to root us in your day-to-day reality. What do you do for a living? Exactly?
Yeah, so what I do is I run a research group. My research group it contains graduate students, postdocs, and some undergraduates. What we are mostly focused on right now is planets, other planets, particularly extrasolar planets, planets orbiting different stars.
Yes.
We're interested in which ones could potentially host life. We've discovered thousands of these extrasolar planets. It's a very exciting time to be in that field. And in the next, hopefully 10 years, we'll start to get some indication of which ones could have life. And the next 50 years, we'll get much more indication. We'll start to put quantitative constraints on the prevalence of life in the universe. So we'll either find some, or we'll be able to say it's so-and-so rare. Of course, we won't be able to say it's a 1 in a million rare, because it's hard to prove something doesn't exist.
Right.
But we might be able to say, well, it's a 1 in 10 rare or less, that kind of a thing. That's sort of what we're working on. And our role is theoretical calculations of atmospheric and oceanic fluid dynamics and radiative transfer in the atmosphere to try to predict which planets will have the conditions necessary to allow life.
Well, that would be its own super interesting conversation. Maybe we should be talking about that. That's interesting. But so we've just established that your profession, what you do for a living, does not intersect with American politics or cultural trends really at all.
Nothing. And in fact, to me, this sort of science is supposed to be a secret garden where you can retreat from all those type of activities.
Yes.
But over the last 5 to 10 years, everything has been introduced into the science. And so there's been a politicization of science.
And this is the hardest of the hard sciences. This is not sociology.
Yeah.
Not to be mean to sociology, but this is different from that.
So when I was an undergraduate, around the turn of the century, there were, in the dining hall, we would hear some of this, my physics buddies, we would hear what some of these other people were saying. And it was sort of like a funny
Did all
joke.
the physics guys eat together?
Yeah, it's a nerd club. And so we would hear what was, I guess, sociology, anthropology. A lot of these fields were infected first.
Yes.
And we would hear what they were saying, and it was just funny and silly. It was like, oh, I'm glad I'm studying physics. But we never thought that it would come for us. And now here we are 20 years later, and it has come for us.
I got to be honest. I cover this stuff for a living. I spent my whole life looking at this stuff. I never imagined that it would get to your department or departments like yours, because
Yeah.
it just doesn't have any connection at all to what you do, right?
No, nothing.
Again, one more digression. You're not the only professor in this department,
Yeah.
or who's got this worldview, science-oriented worldview. What do the other professors think?
Well, so what you have to understand is that you become a tenured faculty member at a place like the University of Chicago by putting your head down and not caring about anything else except for your science.
Yes.
And so that's the mode that most of the faculty in my department and in other departments that are similar around the country are in the sciences. And so they just want to ignore this stuff and move on and, get their grants and get the science done that they're really excited about, build the next cool laser. They don't
Right.
care about this stuff. But the problem is that there's a small group that's extremely committed. You could call them the woke activists or the social justice activists. And they're willing to spend all their time on this stuff, and they sort of steamroll everybody else. And so it's a way that a group that commands maybe 10% of the support on campus can end up defining what direction science departments go.
Yes. This is like the Bolshevik Revolution. No one really supported it, but they took over the country. So that a committed minority can control an apathetic majority pretty easily.
It's true, and that can make you feel pessimistic, but it can also be a cause for hope, because it means that if only a few of us start standing up and asserting principles of academic freedom, then maybe we can turn the tide.
Yes, well, that's the premise of this show, of my worldview. I really hope that that's true. I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is true. So what are the ways that this ideology started to intrude on your department and your science?
Well, so in my particular field of science, it's mostly coming through this diversity, equity, and inclusion, these offices and these administrators. So the schools have all hired large numbers of administrators and deans of diversity, equity, inclusion, et cetera, et cetera. And it acts as a sort of a Trojan horse for the woke ideology to get into the hard sciences. There's actually a book I want to mention to you and your viewers. It's called Counter Wokecraft. It's written by a professor named Charles Pincourt. That's his pen name. He's not even comfortable saying his real name. But he documents what he's seen of a sort of a tactical manual of how the woke operate in a university department and his suggested counter tactics. And so it's a way that you could get into this in more detail than I could possibly do in 1 hour.
That sounds like a worthy book. Tell us, just in your day-to-day experience, so you're studying other planets outside of our solar system to assess their suitability for life. How exactly does the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff affect you?
Well, how it ended up affecting me was I was sitting on a number of committees where I felt that the discussions were not treating each applicant as an individual worthy of dignity and respect. That certain applicants were being written off or dismissed based on their immutable characteristics. And that's how it entered my life.
Okay, so
as a moral issue.
At the point where but to be clear, so at the point where you bring in postdocs or students you're going to teach.
And faculty.
And faculty.
Yes,
okay.
and faculty. So I felt that as a moral issue, I couldn't remain silent on this in good conscience.
It's a big step to speak up about something like this. Did you talk it through with your wife, your
I did
family?
talk it through with my wife. And actually, I talked it through with my wife. I'd been telling her what had been happening. And she's born in Ukraine at the very end of the Soviet period, 1989. She still had to be baptized in secret, because if the government had found out that her mother was a Christian, she would have lost her job. So that's what happens when you end up having ideologies controlling education. And what she said to me was, from what you're telling me, it reminds me of what my mother told me about Soviet times. And people had trouble when they spoke out. Are you sure you won't have trouble? And what I said to her was, if that's what it reminds you of, if I have trouble or not, I need to speak out.
Good for you. Was she impressed? Did she support your decision?
My wife did support my decision. And at first, I was a little worried I was going to lose my job. And I talked to her about it. And she said, I've known hunger. I've known being cold and not having clothes to wear and not having heating. And I know I don't have to worry about that in this country. And so whatever happens, I'm with you and we'll survive.
Wow.
Yeah. She's a very strong person.
Apparently. Well, that is support.
Yeah.
So with that support at home, at the core of your life in your marriage, you move forward to tell the truth.
And try to tell the truth as I see it, yes.
Yes, exactly. So you make, and I've interrupted you 9 times, I'll stop. You make this YouTube video, and what do you say?
Well, essentially, I mean, I tried to go through some of these issues that I had seen coming up. And so one point that I made was that there are effectively quotas being put on Asian Americans. It's done in a roundabout way, but there seem to be quotas being put on Asian Americans. You can see that in the lawsuit of Asian Americans against Harvard.
Yes.
This reminds me of what happened in the mid-20th century to Jewish Americans.
Yes.
And it's something I'm not comfortable with. We all agree that that was wrong, so why don't we see that this is wrong? Another thing I said is, if we care about diversity and inclusivity, why is it that a conservative Christian person on campus doesn't feel welcome, and that their viewpoints are not considered a part of the diversity of our campus experience? So I didn't deny the importance of diversity, because I think it is important. We should have people with different perspectives on campus. Yes. But I just felt that these words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, weren't being lived up to, and that the ideology that was accompanying the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs was harmful in many ways. The other point I made is, what do you think the purpose of a great university is? I'm asking you.
To impart knowledge and to train people to think systematically, which is to say skeptically, logically, to follow.
Yeah, so that's the secondary purpose. What do you think the primary purpose is?
To train our ruling class.
The primary purpose of a university, according to academics, is to produce new knowledge. The secondary purpose is
to produce knowledge, right?
Is to transmit
the research
that,
part.
Is to transmit that knowledge as the secondary purpose. And so I pointed this out, and I said, I think these programs are inconsistent with that primary purpose. The primary purpose of a university is not social justice activism. It's producing new knowledge. And even when that knowledge is inconsistent with your particular ideology, we have to accept it and try to build out our knowledge base, including it.
Well, that's about as clear as it gets. So you post this on YouTube.
Yeah.
And what happens?
Well, so I've later discovered that there's a sort of a mechanism. There's almost like a playbook to try to take someone down who disagrees with the ideology. So the first thing that happens is people go on Twitter and they organize and they write lots of messages about the person. And the messages say mean things. So they'll say, this is racist, bigoted, white supremacist, like very scary sounding things. And then the other thing that they do is they claim that they've been harmed, that people are in danger because of this, and that the speech is a type of violence. So all of this happens on social media and it gets shared around. And the goal is to manipulate the administrator, the decision maker, into making the decision that the activists want. And so there's 3 parties in any of these cancellation disputes. There's the scholar, the political activist, and the decision maker, usually a department chair or a university president or a dean. And so the activists are very effective at manipulating that decision maker using these scary sounding words. The decision maker is usually a well-meaning, middle-aged, center-left person who believes in liberal values, but also cares about people and is susceptible to this type of manipulation. And so that's what happened. And then this culminated in a letter of denunciation against me that was signed by 70 young people in my department, students and postdocs, trying to get me to restrict my teaching, my ability to do research, and then also attempting to accomplish other goals in their program. So, for example, at the University of Chicago, we have a document called the Shills Report, which is about 50 years old and is used as almost like our constitution for hiring and promotion for faculty. And this document requires that only merit be taken into account. So one of the demands was to have this document ripped up and not use it anymore. So it can be fairly explicit in terms of trying to affect certain outcomes. There's no hiddenness about being against merit. It's very upfront. in a campaign like this.
University of Chicago is a little bit different, very different from a lot of schools in that it has this generational reputation as a place that is a meritocracy. And that is a serious place as a result.
Well, so that's actually how U Chicago got on the scene.
Right.
So there was an era when Jews were being discriminated against.
Yes.
And U Chicago said, we're not discriminating against anyone. And as a result, they got a lot of really good people who other places weren't taking. And that's how, in the 20th century, it got up to the same level as the Ivy League schools.
So to a greater extent than in most campuses, that's the identity of the school.
That's true.
This is a meritocratic institution.
Yes. There's actually 3 documents I'd like to tell you about. One is the Shills Report that we have, which is about merit-based hiring. The second is the Chicago Principles, which is a document about 10 years old. And essentially it says, even if someone's saying something that the majority of people on campus consider wrong-headed, incorrect, immoral, whatever, we still have to hear them out. We have to allow them to deliver lectures and to publish. We can't have a moral judgment on who gets to speak on campus, and we certainly can't have it determined by a majority vote. People have to be exposed to different viewpoints. And the third thing I'd like to tell you about, which is very important for academic freedom, and it's often neglected. So everyone knows about the Chicago Principles, but there's also something we have called the Calvin Report, which was from the late 1960s in the Vietnam era. And what the Calvin Report does is it tries to ensure institutional neutrality. So for any major social and political issue, like pick one, abortion, it says that the university cannot take a definitive stance for or against. Neither the university corporate as a body, the president, the provost, the deans, or the department chairs cannot take a definitive stance for or against, because to do so would be to censure any scholar who disagrees and to say that we have a majority opinion. And so that would discourage the academic freedom of that scholar. And it would discourage our ability to accomplish our mission, which is to produce new knowledge. Because knowledge isn't produced by majority vote. You know, sometimes it's what everyone thinks is a crank is the guy who has the right scientific theory.
Yeah, Galileo.
Yeah, is an example.
Yeah, and many others.
There's many examples.
Many examples. And that's true in the arts, too, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of incubating genius and of creating institutions that protect people with unpopular views. Okay, so it sounds like if there's any school in America that had the firewalls in place to protect your dissent, it would be Chicago.
Yes. And so what happened as a result of this was there was sort of wishy-washy behavior from mid-level administrators, but the university president stepped in and issued a strong statement and just said, our scholars can express their opinions any way they want, in any forum they want, and we are not going to punish anyone for that. And that died down at U Chicago.
Good
that
for
was the end of
him.
His name is President Zimmer.
Yes.
He's been a stalwart defender of academic freedom.
I know he has, and probably not gotten the credit he deserves.
No, he has not gotten the credit he deserves.
Cannot be easy being him.
He's gotten a lot of hatred for the stances he's taken, in fact.
Well, bless him for doing that. What about within your department?
Well, within my department, the department has bifurcated. There is a camp that believes in academic freedom and a camp that might pay lip service to academic freedom, but uses language involving harm to try to limit what other people would say.
Were you physically assaulting a lot of students?
No.
Sorry. You're obviously as a compliment, such a gentle person. It's just very obvious that you've lived your life in science and you don't seem like someone who's beating your
there's no physical harm happening. There's no aggression. It's all language. It's just expressing. Essentially, the claim is that by expressing my opinion, I have aggressed against people who are in some sort of oppressed or underprivileged group, defined in some way.
It seems like the opposite is happening. It seems like people are expressing a lot of aggression toward you.
I don't want to make myself out as the victim.
No,
Mr.
I get
Carlson.
it, but it just the inversion of language fascinates me.
It's interesting.
It's often the exact opposite, the mirror image of what's really happening. Okay, so there you are, you put this
Yeah.
out, they attack you on social media as an abuser and a white supremacist or whatever, an evil man. But the president of the university stands
Yes.
effectively on your side.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, so during this period, I said, "What? I just got hit with a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
What the heck was that?" I thought I was just saying what everybody believed, and they tried to squash me and ruin my career. What happened?
Yeah.
And so I start reaching out to different people. Lee Jussum reached out to me. He's a professor of psychology, and he was teaching a course on these issues at Rutgers. And he said, "Oh, will you attend our course and tell us what happened?" It's sort of a case study. And then I ended up continuing to attend his course. It was all on Zoom because it was coronavirus time.
Yeah.
And so I learned a lot, and I made other connections. I was asked to join the Academic Freedom Alliance, which is a new group that supports academic freedom. Professor Robert George at Princeton is one of the leaders of this group.
Yeah.
I was already a part of the Heterodox Academy. I got involved with FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and
Yes.
Education. I met with some of the leadership at ACTA, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. I started networking and trying to understand what had happened and how I can be effective. And as part of this, there was a professor of business at Stanford. He's an expert in game theory. His name is Ivan Marinovich. And he organizes something called the Classical Liberalism Seminar. So classical liberalism is sort of a general theory that developed in the Anglosphere starting 200, 300 years ago. And it contains both what we call liberals and conservatives in this country. But it does not contain what we call woke or social justice, who are illiberal. They don't believe in liberalism. And liberalism basically involves talking together, offering evidence, discussing things, and making decisions in a rational way. And so he has this classical liberalism seminar that he organized in response to the craziness that's been happening. And it's a great seminar because they have controversial speakers, and it's only faculty who attend by invitation only. So everyone can trust who's there. It's about once a week. It's all faculty. There's about 50 people, and you can feel free to say whatever you think. So Yvonne and I started discussing things as part of this group, and we decided to write an op-ed expressing our opinions, and that's what got published this summer in Newsweek.
Yes, in August.
In August, yes.
So in that, I want to put up a couple quotes from that piece that you co-wrote for Newsweek, because I think they, I'll just read them. If we could throw one of those up, I'll read it off the screen. Because I think you laid it out.
Yeah.
DEI violates the ethical and legal principles of equal treatment and entails treating people as members of a group rather than as individuals, repeating the mistake that made possible the atrocities of the 20th century. It requires being willing to tell an applicant, I will ignore your merits and qualifications and deny you admission because you belong to the wrong group, and I have defined a more important social objective that justifies doing so. It treats persons as merely means to an end, giving primacy to a statistic over the individuality of a human being. So nicely expressed. When you put it that way, this is very dark.
Yeah, I think we're playing a dangerous game here. I think a fundamental aspect of legal and moral philosophy has to be that each human being is an individual worthy of dignity and respect. And when you abandon that principle, it's very dangerous.
Well, yeah, because as you said at the very outset, it's a short hop from there to physical violence.
Yeah, so that's the speech issue. So if a related issue, so I'm talking to you, right?
Right.
I'm aware that you sometimes say controversial things.
Right.
Okay? But I value you as an individual. You asked me to come talk about academic freedom.
Yes.
And I'm going to come talk to you because, we're going to talk man to man and we're going to,
of course,
talk things over. Now, part of...
And you speaking to me is not the same as ratifying all of my different crazy opinions, which you may disagree with, but that's not the point.
If you didn't talk to everyone you disagreed with something on, you wouldn't talk to anyone.
Right.
So part of respecting someone else as an individual worthy of dignity and respect is allowing them to speak and then engaging with them in discourse. If you take away that, then if we have a disagreement, how can we settle that?
Well, exactly.
Just violence, yeah.
And I think inherent in that is allowing a person to explain what he thinks. people to describe their own views.
Exactly.
I mean, it would not be fair of me to say, Professor Abbott thinks this, that, and the other thing. Well, why don't I just ask him and let him describe what he thinks?
Yeah, so in these Twitter mobs, that's one of the tactics that gets used. And so they'll say, like, I read some of the things that they were writing about me, and I was like, that guy, he sounds terrible. Whoever said that, he's terrible. Who is that guy? But it had nothing to do with anything that I've said. So that's one of the tactics, because then once you've built up this straw man enemy, then you can knock him down easily.
Of course. Yes, I have lived this. Quite extensively, in fact. But, I'm not a scientist, and I haven't, spent my life studying applied mathematics or other planets. So it must be, I sort of expected maybe a little more than you. How did this affect your life, your circle of friends, your job? Like, you go from being famous among a small group of fellow experts to being kind of nationally known. Like, what happens then?
Well, I hope that I don't become prideful and that I can continue to live my life morally. And I know that's difficult when people know your name.
It is difficult when people know your name, but it's absolutely the right goal.
But certainly, it used to be that my theories were judged only on their theories, and I fear now that that may not be the case any longer. However, it's a small sacrifice to make compared to the sacrifices that other people have made for freedom.
Amen. I can feel the resolve in those words. How has it affected your friendships with people in the university?
Maybe I lost some friends and maybe I made some others. So it's okay. I like the people who support me and want to talk about these issues seriously.
Yes. Non-scientific question, but what percentage, roughly, would you say of tenured professors at a place like Chicago fundamentally agree with you?
Depends what you mean.
Yeah.
So there's two issues at play here. The first issue is the criticisms that I've made of diversity and equity and inclusion programs. I don't know what the percentage is who agree with me on that on campus. What I do know is that according to a recent Pew poll, 74% of Americans agree with me. Okay,
yes.
So that may not be true on campus, but 74% of Americans believe that when considering hiring and promotion, only relevant merit should be taken into account, even if it means less diversity, while at the same time, 75% of Americans think that diversity is important. So I do know that the views I'm expressing are held by a supermajority of Americans, which almost nothing else is these days. So that's issue number one. But issue number two is the academic freedom issue.
Yes.
So whether you agree with me or not, do you agree that I should be able to speak? I would say I hope that the majority of faculty agree with me on that. But I don't have the numbers to tell you for sure.
I guess what I'm asking is, have you had other professors take you aside or text you to say, bless you for what you're doing?
Yeah, so a very large number have. Very few have spoken out publicly, but I want to talk to you about someone who has.
Great.
So this is a man of very high integrity. His name is David Romps. He's a professor at Berkeley.
How do you spell his name?
R-O-M-P-S.
Romps, okay.
Yeah, he's a professor at Berkeley. And he was the director of a center, like a research center, which includes a number of faculty, maybe 10-ish faculty, a lot of grad students, postdocs, so 50 to 100 people in my field. And yesterday, he announced that he was resigning as the director of this center. And the reason is that, we're probably going to get to this, but I had a lecture canceled at MIT recently.
Yes.
The reason he's resigning is, as part of that, he asked the other faculty in his center if they could invite me instead of the MIT lecture as a statement of support for academic freedom. And apparently it became clear that not only would they agree to inviting me for this purpose, but they never wanted me invited to Berkeley campus ever again. And he was so upset with this sort of violation of academic freedom that he resigned publicly. And he posted that on Twitter. And in just one day, more than 20,000 people have liked it. It's gotten 1,000 comments. He took a very brave stand that very few people are willing to in the modern climate.
Good for him.
Yeah.
So let's back up, and if you don't mind,
Yeah.
describing your experience with this lecture, which I'm proud to say was called the Carlson Lecture.
Yeah.
I'm not the smartest Swede out there. I don't know who it's named for, but what is the Carlson Lecture, and why were you asked
so this
to deliver
has been going for 10 years. There are a variety of different honors and types of recognition in an academic career. They're important for promotions. So I'm a tenured professor, but I'm an associate professor. So I got to get up to the next level. It's just kind of like silly games like everyone has in every field.
But does that determine your pay, for example?
Yeah, it affects your pay.
Yeah.
And, it can have some effect on your ability to get grants and things like that. And so as part of building your case up for getting those promotions, you can get these recognitions, like being invited to give a big lecture. And so the Carlson Lecture is one of them. Only the top people in the field are invited to do this. You give a large public lecture for like 500 people, and then you visit the department at MIT.
About your research?
About a outreach level of your research.
Okay.
So not about the cutting edge research, but about things that you can relate to the public in a coherent and interesting and engaging way.
Interesting.
And then you also give a technical lecture at MIT, and you visit for a week and meet with the faculty and students and discuss future research projects and things like that. So I was selected to give that lecture. I was supposed to give it, actually Thursday is when it would have been.
Now, just to be clear, that lecture had nothing to do with what we've been talking about.
Zero. Absolutely nothing. No, couldn't be further away from it than anything.
Purely about your study of planets and other solar systems.
Yes, exactly. And actually, anyone who, I don't know when this is going to air, but it's going to be given at Princeton.
Wait, but why isn't it being given at MIT, which you think of as a very serious place?
Because there was another Twitter mob that was upset about my essay with Yvonne this summer. And in fact, after the essay on Twitter, a strategy developed. So you can actually watch the thinking of this group in process because they post it publicly on Twitter. And so the strategy developed as a way to increase the pressure on me and anyone else who might disagree with what's happening on campus. The strategy developed to never invite me to give seminars again and to find replacements of other people who could deliver a seminar on the subject areas that I have expertise in. And the reason that's important is because our scientific work we distribute through academic articles, but also through public lectures.
Yes.
That's how we get it out. And so it's a way to cripple someone's scientific career and put pressure on them not to speak out against what's going on.
So given that the complaints against you had nothing to do with the subject matter you've devoted your life studying,
Yeah.
nothing to do with your research, MIT can't possibly cave to that.
Yeah, well, so what happened was within a week of this Twitter storm, the department chair sent me an email and asked to talk. And I thought he was going to say, look, MIT defends academic freedom. We know that what you're going to talk about has nothing to do with your opinions on merit hiring. But we've got these students who are upset. And so we're going to explain to them that if they disrupt your lecture, they have the following penalties, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to have security, and we're going to go ahead with it. But instead, he said the lecture's canceled, and I was in shock. I didn't think that could happen. I didn't know we had gotten to that place as a society.
Well, describe the conversation. I mean, what, was he apologetic? Was he embarrassed?
I can't describe it in more detail than that because I may not be the best at picking up on emotions. And also, I was a little upset, so...
I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm just reminded of you and your physics friends in
Exactly,
the
yeah.
Harvard cafeteria.
We weren't talking about emotions.
Sorry. I'm not laughing at you. This is so
It's
great.
okay.
I really, look,
I'm proud to be a nerd.
I love that. I live in a humanities world. I never
Yeah.
meet anybody like you. But I'm so grateful you exist, or we wouldn't have, say, air travel. So, wow. So this administrator caved to the mob. Well, let me just ask this. Did the person prostrate himself before you and beg your forgiveness.
No.
Okay, so that's despicable, I would say. Now that's my view. I just got to read because I just want our viewers to understand the kind of person you are, which is to say a far better Christian than I'm capable of being. This is a tweet you sent out after the lecture was canceled. Quote, "I forgive the activists who led the campaign against me. Please do not attack them personally. They are fish swimming in a sea of moral confusion. Some of the responsibility for their behavior rests on their elders who have not helped them form properly." Boy, if that's not Christian forgiveness, I don't know what is. I'm really impressed that you were able to write that. My fingers would not type that, even if I told them to. They just wouldn't. So good for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I view this as an issue that some of these people who've gotten caught up in this woke stuff, they've grown up in a moral vacuum.
Yes.
And this is filling that for them. And so we all have responsibility for our actions, but we can have compassion for them because they've gotten sort of tricked by this propaganda that claims to be, it presents itself as advancing laudable moral goals, but in fact, it's a radical ideology that's dangerous for society.
Oh, absolutely. And you've made such a restrained but crystal clear case about its dangers and where this leads. So the MIT lecture is canceled. That's shocking. Forever changes my view of MIT, that the institution itself could allow this to happen, allow Twitter to determine its academic standards and to destroy academic freedom and speech. But you are now giving a lecture at Princeton. Please describe how that is happening.
Yeah, so part of this networking I did after my first run-in, through part of it I met Professor Robert George, who is a professor at Princeton, and he runs the Madison program there. They're mostly concerned with issues of constitutional law and society and things like that. But they have a large range of topics that they can cover. And so I contacted him when this happened, and I said, "Wow, this is crazy." And he said, "Oh, this is not good." And he said, let us organize your lecture for you. So through the Madison program, we'll organize it on Zoom, and anyone can attend in the whole world. And so it was supposed to be a lecture to maybe 500 people, and there's now almost 10,000 signed up for it through the Madison program at Princeton.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so that's the sort of thing, as academics, we can support each other when someone is attacked, and we can reach out to the public and make it clear to people that we're not going to allow ourselves to be silenced by these sort of groups of ideologues.
This is the famous Robbie George
at
Princeton, who's been around for an awfully long time and is the professor of last resort for a lot of people who are in your position because he's a decent and principled person. Will the lecture, I have to ask before I sign up for it personally, will it be about your specialty or will
it's the exact same thing I was going to give. And anyone who watches can see that it's just about science. It has nothing
Are
to do
there
with
10,000 people who could understand it?
Yes, that's what it's designed for.
Oh, it is? Okay, good.
You could understand it. I hope you'll attend.
Actually, I will, because the one regret I have in this conversation is what you do in your academic area sounds legitimately pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think you'll like it. It should be engaging, and anyone in the public should be able to enjoy it. You know, with any scientific lecture, when I attend a scientific lecture, I don't understand 100% of the things that are being said, but I designed it so that most of it, everyone should be able to understand.
Interesting. I've never used the phrase, quote, when I attend a scientific lecture. It's just never.
Well,
never
now you can.
Uttered those words. So what's your plan? First of all, I just have to say again, I can't say it strongly enough. Thank you for your bravery, for your dedication to the bedrock principles of the country, without which we can't really continue.
Yeah.
Because I know this is kind of not what you wanted to be doing with your life.
Yeah.
Or you would have been working in the Congress, right?
Yeah.
So what are your plans going forward?
I want to spend 80 to 90% of my time doing science long term, but I want to spend 10 to 20% of my time advocating for academic freedom. And so one idea I've been talking about with other faculty at UChicago is trying to start a center for a free society. And we would purposefully invite speakers who some people viewed as controversial, but we would require everyone to engage with them respectfully. we would also host fellows from a variety of different fields who have an interest in academic freedom or who have potentially suffered harms for expressing their opinions. And so the goal would be to promote academic freedom and connect that to the importance for a free society more generally.
Do you think University of Chicago would allow you to do that?
We'll see. I'm optimistic, but we'll see.
Amazing. You rarely meet people who are this fascinating and wonderful combination of legitimately tough and also kind. Not a lot of people like that running around. I mean, you were one of them.
Thank you.
So we are rooting for you.
Thank you.
We'll be watching. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank
for
you
this
so much,
conversation.
Mr.
Great.
Carlson, for giving me the opportunity to talk about
Oh, I
academic
love
freedom.
it. I love it. This has made me more hopeful than anything I've heard in a long time. So
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go to Tucker Carlson tonight. We haven't taken a poll, but it's possible on this Thursday evening you may be wondering what the hell is going on in our country. There are so many unanswered questions, some of them lingering. How, for example, did senile hermit Joe Biden get 15 million more votes than his former boss, rock star crowd surfer Barack Obama? Results like that would seem to defy the laws of known physics and qualify instead as a miracle. Was the 2020 election a miracle? Honestly, we don't know. We don't expect to get an answer to it tonight. So let's move instead to more immediate questions, like all these weird things shooting through the sky over the United States and Canada that nobody seems able to positively identify. Should we be worried about these things? And then what about our infrastructure? The steel and concrete parts of America that the Biden administration has shown strange contempt for, possibly because they were built by those dreaded white construction workers that Mayor Pete dislikes so much. Our critical infrastructure appears to be falling apart. Is that a problem? Or can we, in the bright new transhumanist future our leaders envision, feed ourselves with McKinsey consultants alone? And if we can, how do they taste? You may be wondering all of this, or maybe you're not wondering any of it because you have no clue what we're talking about because the media hasn't told you about it. A press corps that's willing to spend a full week ignoring a toxic mushroom cloud over Ohio will ignore pretty much anything. So in case you're not up to date, here's a partial recap of events. Last night, there was a massive and as yet unexplained fire at a plant nursery just south of Orlando. The fire burned more than 2 acres of plastic planters. Now, burning plastic releases a lot of bad chemicals, including dioxins, which you don't want, and that's why you don't do this in your fireplace. When a single plastic beaker melted in Stanford's science building last year, the school evacuated the area. But outside Orlando, there was no evacuation. Residents were told to stay in their homes. None of the environmentalists in the Biden administration, the people who claim ostentatiously to care about the environment, said anything about it. Nor did they have a lot to say about what happened in Tucson on Tuesday. A tractor-trailer carrying nitric acid rolled over on I-10. Nitric acid is a carcinogen. Within 2 hours of the crash, authorities evacuated a small number of residents. They told everybody living within a mile to shelter in place. Then 2 hours after that, they lifted the shelter-in-place order. But then the next morning, authorities announced that they had, quote, reinstated the shelter-in-place order for a 1-mile perimeter around the incident. And then they told residents to, quote, turn off heaters and or air conditioning systems that bring in outside air. Ooh, outside air. No air for you. Well, why did they give this order? Because the first order, it turns out, was wrong. It wasn't safe for people to move back into their homes. So just as in East Palestine, Ohio, authorities, for whatever reason, exposed people to dangerous chemicals. If this is incompetence, there seems to be an awful lot of it lately. Then today, it nearly happened again. A freight train derailed about 30 miles west of downtown Detroit. It's a Norfolk Southern train. That's the same company that operated the train that derailed in East Palestine, Ohio. 30 cars went off the tracks. Fortunately, if the information that we are getting tonight is accurate, and we can't vouch that it is, the car containing liquid chlorine did not overturn, apparently. So that is, however you slice it, an awful lot of drama on our roads and rails in a single week. Who's in charge of our roads and rails anyway? Well, that would be the Secretary of Transportation. That would be Pete Buttigieg. He's in charge. He was asked about it today. In response, he pointed out that train derailments are not a big deal. Settle down. They're very common. Train derailments happen on average nearly 3 times every day.
Look, rail safety is something that that has evolved a lot over the years, but there's clearly more that needs to be done because while this horrible situation has gotten a particularly high amount of attention, there are roughly 1,000 cases a year of a train derailing.
Wait a second. You think East Palestine is a big deal? 1,000 trains derail every year in the United States, says Pete Buttigieg, who presumably has the stats on it. Did you know that? Are you okay with 1,000 trains a year derailing in your country? Don't a lot of these trains carry highly dangerous chemicals through highly populated areas? Yeah. So if you were Pete Buttigieg, put yourself in his tiny position for a moment. If you were him, wouldn't fixing that, this ongoing disaster, be your very first priority? Well, of course it would be, but you're not Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg doesn't care about trains derailing. He cares about equity. Trains derailing, that's fine. You're fine. You're so fine that the people who show up to test the air and the water after a train derailment are wearing hazmat suits because the air and water are perfectly safe as long as you're wearing a hazmat suit. See? There's a simple solution to this. Stop whining. Now, what does Norfolk Southern think of all this? We'd love to know, but we don't know because the company skipped the town hall last night in East Palestine, Ohio. Hundreds of locals had gathered to ask obvious and, for them, pressing questions like, why are thousands of fish and animals dying? Why? But executives at Norfolk Southern didn't show up at the event. Why? Because they were worried for their own safety.
Why is the company not here?
Because they're scared for their safety.
Hundreds of anxious residents packed a school gym here in East Palestine on Wednesday night, looking for answers almost 2 weeks after a huge train derailment released hazardous chemicals into their town, contaminating much of the surrounding area. But there were notable absences from the town hall meeting, including the rail operator, Norfolk Southern. Also not attending, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. The mayor says he's had limited contact with the White House, leaving folks here frustrated, angry, and complaining about a lack of information from the feds and Norfolk Southern. State officials and the EPA say the water and air are both safe, but residents here tell a different story. They say they've been getting sick, and so have their pets.
It's so safe, we're not going there. Our oxygen tanks are empty. And by the way, there are elderly, low-income people on crutches there. We don't feel safe around them. But from the perspective of the people who live in East Palestine, it looks a little different. You would think if you live in the United States and you send by force at gunpoint half of your annual pay to Washington, someone in Washington would care when your town is poisoned by a train derailment. Oh, but you thought wrong. Who do you think you are, Ukrainian? Nobody cares about you. Is this Kyiv? No, it's Ohio. Shut up. The Biden administration has other priorities, by the way, like shooting down $300 weather balloons with $400,000 missiles. And yes, apparently they did that. Joe Biden himself admitted it today.
We don't yet know exactly what these three objects were, but nothing right now suggests they were related to China's spy balloon program or that they were surveillance vehicles from any other country. The intelligence community's current assessment is that these three objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research.
That's the quote. Intelligence community, air quotes now required. That's the intelligence community's assessment. Oh, their kids sent a balloon up and we sent a Sidewinder after it. Mission accomplished. A lot of questions that emanate quite naturally from that bewildering announcement, but Joe Biden didn't take any of them. He scampered off without taking questions. Be gone, serfs! Like Norfolk Southern and Mayor Pete, Biden knows he doesn't have to answer the questions because what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Well, actually, they're starting to worry a little bit about what you might do about it. The people in charge are stupid, obviously, but they're not so dim they don't understand the consequences of serially mistreating the country over a period of many years. They're starting to get worried. They are afraid of the people they govern. How do we know that? Because they're moving at high speed to disarm the people they govern. Here's plastic surgery model Gavin Newsom of California last month.
We've chosen this. This is our decision to live in these conditions. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So we've chosen this. We've accepted this. We can sit there and say thoughts and prayers, or we can look in the mirror and say, this is the price, I guess, of whatever. Fill in the blank. Freedom? This is the price I get. Freedom? Freedom from what?
stupid as prayer, says Gavin Newsom. People who pray are idiots. I'm the only God here. Bow down before me. You can no longer defend yourselves. Only I have the right to defend your life. Now think about that for a minute. It's not a reassuring message, really. Anyone who strips you of your basic God-given right to self-defense is probably not your friend. And anyone who does it in a moment of chaos like the ones we're living through, chaos that people like Gavin Newsom caused on purpose, anyone who does that is probably your blood enemy. But Gavin Newsom is not alone. Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan has the very same message. Stop praying and obey. Watch.
Firearms are getting more dangerous too, thanks to 3D printed technology called Glock switches that turn semi-automatic weapons fully automatic. That's why we launched Operation Safe Neighborhoods, taking hundreds of illegal firearms off the street before they could be used in the commission of a crime. But we must do more. So the world our kids inherit is not more violent than the one we inhabit now. The time for only thoughts and prayers is over.
Another low IQ plastic surgery disaster lecturing us about things she has no understanding of. So laugh at Gretchen Whitmer if you will. But then think about what she's saying. She's mocking prayer. Really? Well, now that you mention it, Gretchen Whitmer, we might use a little prayer right now. Prayers work better than equity. Prayers are safer than Norfolk Southern. Prayers are more comforting than Kamala Harris's laugh. There's nothing wrong with prayers. What we don't need any more of is more totalitarian atheists with ill-gotten political power and designs on our lives. We've got enough of those, including you. So when they're telling you that the two things you cannot have are guns and prayer, you know for a fact that those are the two things you need most. And we're seeing a lot of evidence of that lately. Abandoned by their government to a world politicians have intentionally made chaotic, Americans are protecting themselves. They have no choice. Here's one recent and inspiring example from the state of Arizona.
If he hadn't had a gun, my gun never would have come out. Ever. That's all there is to it.
Brian says it was around 5:15 Wednesday morning when the suspect walked into the Chevron where he works the graveyard shift.
But I could hear him say, rob money, you know, so. But in all reality, he didn't need to say anything. The moment he pointed the gun at me, it was pretty obvious what he was there for.
Suspect pointed the gun at Brian, but then Brian says he turned and pointed the weapon at a customer. Police confirm that's when Brian took action.
When he turned around, the clerk got out his own firearm and shot the suspect and was able to defend himself at that time.
I'm supposed to relieve him, and I saw everything, and I go, oh my God. But luckily, the other employee is okay.
Had the suspect walked in 30 minutes later, Brian says his co-worker would have been behind the register. As terrifying as the situation was, he's glad he was the one to be there.
We're living through the most political moment in American history, but stories like the one you just saw transcend politics. We don't know who anyone in that tape voted for, but we know exactly how they felt as human beings, afraid and alone. And that's what happens when the government ceases conducting its most basic duty, which is to protect its citizens. And they won't. They won't protect you. They've said that out loud, and everybody knows it. Again, no matter who they voted for. And so increasingly, Americans are having to defend themselves. And once again, anyone who tells you you can't defend yourself is your enemy. So here's an example that is amazing, and we think you'll agree that it is. In Tampa last month, a woman called Nishali Alma was working out in her apartment complex's gym. And because she's a kind person, she let in a man who was trying to open the door. That man then attempted to rape her. You're seeing the footage on your screen right now. Now, Nishali Alma did not have a gun. She was in a gym, but she's extraordinarily tough, and she was able to fight off the man who was trying to rape her. His name was Xavier Thomas Jones. Thomas Jones was later arrested after he tried to rape another woman in the apartment complex. The resilience and the strength you see in that video is so inspiring and so perfectly captures the best part of America that we wanted to speak to Nishali Alma tonight, and she was gracious enough to agree. She joins us now. Nishali, thank you so much for coming on. Anyone who watches that video, and again, it's not a political point, but just has to stand back in awe at your ferocity. How did you summon this? So this man is bigger than you, and he's totally determined to hurt you, and you literally fought him off. What were you thinking?
In my head, you know, whenever it was happening, I wasn't really fearful at all. In my head, it was just, I got to fight him. I got to do something, you know, and he was equal to me. He wasn't bigger than me. He wasn't anything more than my size. And I kind of took that to my advantage, to my own head, and I fought him.
There's a moment in the tape I've watched like 4 times. It's so interesting. He comes towards you, and he hasn't even grabbed you yet, and you determine this guy is going to hurt me. He's an enemy. You don't lie to yourself. You just immediately go after him. Why? And a lot of people don't do that. They lie to themselves. Why were you able to know exactly what this man's intention was?
Right. It's because my mom always told me, don't let anybody ever approach you or touch you if you don't know them. And as soon as he approached me, I knew I had to push him off or do something.
Yeah, well, you certainly did do something. And the guy just finally gave, you were so ferocious with him that he just finally gave up.
Yeah. After a little bit of wrestling on the ground, I yanked out his beard hairs, and he eventually gave out.
So what, I mean, this is the scene I think that a lot of people, women particularly, fear. You're alone in the gym at night, and some rapist comes in and tries to literally rape you. What advice, having lived through it, would you give people watching?
You know, like I said, some people forget their key fob, and they do let people in for their kindness of their hearts. But always be cautious, always watch your back, and if you're ever in that situation, fight back. Amen.
Amen. Fight back. That is, it's just wonderful. But thank you for what you did, and congratulations on succeeding.
Thank you.
Well, more than a week ago, students at Asbury University in Kentucky gathered for a service in the school chapel. One boy stood up unbidden, and in the most honest possible terms began to reveal his deepest personal flaws to the whole group. In Christian language, this is called confession. Now, the moment the boy did this, the atmosphere changed palpably. People in the room said they could feel a presence, a spirit, they said, that made them feel joyful and liberated. And so they stayed. The church service never ended. It's still going on tonight. We told you about all this last night, and we interviewed the school's student body president. After the show, we found ourselves still thinking about it. We didn't fully understand what was happening at Asbury, and we don't really understand it now. We're not sure anyone does understand it. But whatever is going on seemed wonderful. It seemed like the sort of thing we badly need more of. So we started making plans to go to Kentucky on Friday, tomorrow, to see the service for ourselves. And then this morning, a remarkable thing happened. We got a call from Asbury University asking us not to come. It's not personal, they said. They like our show. But the ongoing service at Asbury is purely spiritual. It's got nothing to do with politics or business. No one there is making money from it or planning a run for office. It's mostly just young people worshiping God, young people finding meaning and answers in a country that increasingly doesn't offer much of either. It's not really a place for TV cameras. And we understood that. In fact, we deeply respected it. When you work in television, you run into a lot of people who want publicity. You almost never meet anyone who doesn't want publicity. And when you do meet people who don't want publicity, they're either doing something wrong or, in the rarest of all cases, they're doing something right. Something so right and so beautiful and so true that media coverage can't enhance it. It can only detract from it. We think that's what's happening at Asbury University. God bless them for turning us down. News tonight on Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania's health, which is not reassuring. Plus, Joe Biden went in for a medical checkup today, and the results just came in. We've got all of that for you straight ahead. Several times, probably several hundred times over the past 6.5 years, we brought you updates on the ongoing disaster that is Mr. Don Lemon of the Cable News Network. And tonight seems like a perfect opportunity to bring you an update. Unfortunately, there's just too much. And so we just want to reassure our viewers who are waiting for the Don Lemon update that tomorrow night is the payoff. In the meantime, it's news to no one that John Fetterman is unfit to serve the United States Senate. He was not fit to run for office, but the cynical people around him, including his supremely cynical wife, pushed him to do it because of their lust for power and because of the machine in Pennsylvania he wound up winning. Kind of a disgrace to democracy, really, but that's where we are. Now, just a month into his term as a senator, we have yet another major and very sad update about John Fetterman's health. Fox's Trace Gallagher has it for us tonight. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, when you read all the press releases about the news articles about Senator Fetterman going back into the hospital, the word voluntary pops up a lot, as if Fetterman's staff is trying to emphasize that this was 100% his choice. We know that John Fetterman is now at Walter Reed Medical Center being treated for clinical depression, which he reportedly has suffered on and off throughout his life. Fetterman's office released a statement saying, quoting here, "The doctors at Walter Reed told us that John is getting the care he needs and will soon be back to himself." The hospital nor his staff did not elaborate on exactly what happens or what the process is to get the senator back to being himself. They will only say the doctors recommended that Fetterman get inpatient care. And remember, Fetterman spent 3 days last week in the hospital because he was feeling lightheaded, but doctors have ruled out another stroke or seizure. You'll recall he suffered a stroke on the campaign trail in May of last year that was nearly fatal, and the effects of the stroke, mostly auditory processing and speech issues, were very prevalent throughout the campaign and are still to this day. Fetterman's staff is now telling NBC News that his difficulties with communication have also had an impact on his relationship with his family, and so has his time away from them because of his Senate duties. And of course, that brings up the very same question many asked back in the fall, which is, was becoming a U.S. Senator simply too much, too soon? Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us tonight. Thanks so much. You bet. So, of course, every decent person feels sorry for John Fetterman and sincerely hopes that he overcomes his cognitive problems, his physical problems, and his mental illness. But there are still millions of Pennsylvanians who were hoping he could represent them in the United States Senate, and they're now being unrepresented because he's in an inpatient psychiatric facility. What about them? It's not just about his personal journey of recovery, it's about the millions of other people. So keep them in your prayers too. Joe Biden, speaking of, had the second physical of his presidency today. It was conducted at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, as it's now called. According to the White House physician, the physical demonstrates that Joe Biden is, when we're quoting, a healthy, vigorous 80-year-old male, which may seem a little bit like an oxymoron, but whatever. He has AFib, spinal arthritis, and a few other conditions. Apparently, he did not take, notably, a cognitive test. The White House is not making the White House physician available for questions, of course. But we have, thank heaven, Dr. Mark Siegel to assess. He joins us tonight. Doctor, thanks for coming on. What do you make of this?
Tucker, you already got the key point, which is this physical exam is more significant for what it leaves out than what it actually tells us. And it tells us he's got allergies, he's got reflux, he's got spinal stenosis in his spine, he has arthritis in his spine. And they're trying to say on this physical something that we've been talking about for a year, which is where's the stiff gait he has coming from? And they're saying it's coming from peripheral neuropathy, meaning loss of sensation in his feet, which they don't know where that's coming from, and arthritis in the spine. Here's my problem with that. They're basing that on a physical examination of multiple doctors, but no MRI. I don't see anywhere in there about an MRI. Since the 1980s, I want to tell you, Dr. O'Connor, we don't just examine patients extensively and say no multiple sclerosis, no stroke, no problems with water on the brain that could be causing cognitive problems. We do an MRI. Where's the MRI? And also, you already said it, where's the cognitive test? We have a cognitive error a day, at least, from this president, who the other day said 20,000 pounds of fentanyl was enough to kill 1,000 people. How about 4 billion people? Or he calls Kamala Harris the president, or he forgets a congressperson's name, or one that has died he thinks is in the audience. I mean, this is really extensive, and it's getting worse. His own son, who he named the cancer moonshot after, he says died in Iraq. This has got to be examined. And then, listen to this. A stiff gait is sometimes a sign of cognitive problems. An MRI, a cognitive test. Now listen, Tucker, I know 80-year-olds that are operating still. We know 90-year-olds who are amazing. But it's not about age, even though most Americans say he's too old to run again. I say it's about fitness, Tucker.
Yeah, it's so obvious that it's insulting, really, to the rest of us. We appreciate your expertise in analyzing these so-called results. Dr. Mark Siegel, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So if you could pick one demographic in the United States, one profile that is universally reviled, hated, in fact, by the people in charge, it'd be the residents of East Palestine, Ohio. So they're effectively being ignored. J.D. Vance is from that world. He's not ignoring them at all. He went there today and will tell us what he found. Ignoring the disaster in East Palestine, Ohio for nearly 2 weeks, the Biden administration now says the area is totally safe, just as long as you're wearing a hazmat suit, or better yet, as long as you don't actually visit it. All the dead fish and the chlorine smell in the air, whatever, totally normal. Your nose does not know. J.D. Vance is a senator from the state of Ohio. He's also from Ohio, and he had some questions, so he went to East Palestine, which seemed like a pretty simple step. A lot of people can't manage it, but he did. And after visiting, he challenged the EPA administrator, Michael Regan, to drink a glass of tap water in the town of East Palestine. Weirdly, Michael Regan has not accepted that challenge. We are grateful to have Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio with us tonight. Senator, thanks so much for coming on. I notice a lot of the people who are reassuring us about how fine East Palestine is don't really want to go there. In fact, they've avoided going there. Do you think Regan will drink the tap water?
I don't suspect that he will, Tucker, and a lot of residents, unfortunately, are not comfortable drinking the tap water either. And it's easy not to see why, Tucker. The thing that I came away from after visiting today is that, one, residents are very, very scared, obviously, but they are also not getting answers from their authorities about exactly what's going on, what's being done to clean up the disaster. And on that point in particular, Tucker, the railroad has completely failed to clean up the toxic soil that's leaking into the riverways, into the waterways, and into the groundwater. So there's this question about testing and whether we're testing the water enough. The question that I have is, why haven't they cleaned up the contaminated soil that's going to eventually contaminate the groundwater no matter what?
So you've been criticized for suggesting that maybe people who are still in East Palestine drink bottled water, and that's scaremongering because apparently we should just follow the science and do what we're told. Why would someone criticize you for counseling caution?
You know, I have no idea, Tucker. I think that there's a complete refusal to deal with the fact that a lot of residents are freaked out on the ground. Obviously, people want to get back to their lives. They also want to know that they're safe. And the thing that's very clear, if you talk to the EPA, if you talk to the CDC, they cannot tell us what a clean threshold is for the water. So on the one hand, you have to measure the water to know how much of this contaminant is in it. On the other hand, you have to know at what level the contaminant is low enough that it's clean water, that it's safe for humans to drink. We've been completely unable to get a good answer from any federal authorities to that question. And if I can't get that answer, and I'm a United States Senator, that suggests that the people of East Palestine who want to be cautious have every right to do it. The simple fact is, Tucker, that unless we go in and study the effect of vinyl chloride on human beings, we're never going to be able to say with confidence what is going to happen to the residents of East Palestine. They want to rebuild their community. They want to get back to normal life, but they can't do it unless the government does its job.
That's right. By the way, if you say you're an environmentalist and care about the environment, you should care about the air and the soil and the water. You know, climate is not the environment, I would say. J.D. Vance, a senator from Ohio who took the time to visit one of his own communities. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Courtney Miller lives in East Palestine, Ohio. She says she did not get any answers from last night's town hall meeting. She also said the water in her pond is now rainbow colored, and we can confirm that's not natural. Courtney Miller joins us tonight. Courtney, thanks so much for coming on. So you went to the meeting last night, the now famous meeting that the Biden administration and Norfolk Southern both boycotted for their own safety. What did you learn anything?
I did.
What did you learn?
We got no answers.
Yeah.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. People were getting more upset, and we just got up and left. They told us that they were supposed to know what was on that train because it was hazardous materials. And at first it was just one chemical, and then it was 2 chemicals. And the paper that they gave us last night had 6 different chemicals, hazardous chemicals, listed on the paper, saying that that's what was on the train. Nobody knows what's on the train. We're getting the runaround. Nobody wants to touch the water. And I'm not sure if you saw the Twitter video. Last I checked, it was up to 2.4 million views in a couple of hours of me throwing a rock in the creek bed behind my house. The EPA said that it was fine to drink. DeWine said it was fine. And then all of a sudden now we have to drink bottled water. But who's paying for that bottled water? We are. We have to pay for it. And a lot of us are on welfare. A lot of us don't have the extra money because it gets expensive, especially if does it get absorbed into your skin? Do we have to bath in bottled water? Who's paying for this? We are. We have to. So when I threw that rock in that Twitter video and you could see all of that disgusting rainbow colored stuff coming up, I made sure that I bottled it. I bottled it, I labeled it, I dated it. So DeWine and the EPA, here's their bottle of water that they can drink while they're making us go to the store and buy this bottled water that we have to drink when I'm a single mother, I have 2 children, and I don't have a vehicle currently, so I have to walk to the store and carry a case of water and tote around a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old walking to and from a store to get bottled water. Where's our help? And what about the people who can't walk to the store, who don't have vehicles? Why is no one out here helping us? Where is everyone? Why is DeWine not doing his job? Why is FEMA not here? Why aren't we getting any answers when we were supposed to get answers?
Well, your town voted for Mike DeWine. Yeah, maybe DeWine will show up. You guys voted for him. You put him there. So maybe we'll take time out of his busy schedule doing whatever he's doing for Ukraine to show up in East Palestine. Hope so. Courtney Miller, thank you so much tonight. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So for years now, we have been told that if you work at a big company, you are forced to declare your pronouns. Declare your pronouns. Well, obviously, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's insane, but they keep pushing people to do it. In fact, demanding that people do it. Why? What's really going on here? What is the pronoun thing about? We'll take a look at it next. So this state your pronouns thing has been going on for years, but nobody's ever really explained what it's about. For most of us, it is crystal clear immediately what sex somebody is. We've had a million years of training determining whether someone's the opposite or same sex is like a basic biological need. So unless you're Pat from Saturday Night Live, there's really no question. And if there is a question about whether you're a man or a woman, interested parties can ask you directly. So this is nonsensical. Declaring your pronouns is a ritual, actually. In some places, it's a strictly enforced ritual with no obvious purpose, but of course there's a purpose. Pronouns, in fact, are a kind of secret handshake that alerts everybody else in the cult that you're also a member. But more profoundly, and this is the real reason they do it, declaring your pronouns is a propaganda tool. It's an ideological weapon. Declaring your pronouns is an attempt to sow uncertainty in order to undermine the reality of biological sex. So when you post your pronouns in your Twitter bio, what you're really saying is, male and female are such fluid, meaningless categories that it's entirely possible my sex could change tomorrow, so I'd better keep my Twitter bio updated accordingly just so you'll know. That's what they're saying. But it's a lie. It's the most basic of all lies because sex is the most basic of all facts. Sex, like height and eye color, is fixed. It cannot be changed. You're born one sex and you will die that same sex, no matter how you feel about that fact, no matter how many drugs you take, no matter how much plastic surgery you can pay for. You are not in control of your sex. You're born with it. Whether you're a man or a woman is obvious. It's obvious in your bone structure. It's obvious in the way that your mind works. Yes, that's true. Your sex can be detected in a blood test. Your sex is the most basic and unchanging biological fact about you. So pretending otherwise is ridiculous. It's also completely dishonest. Anyone who participates in a pronoun ritual is an idiotic herd animal and/or a propagandist. So who does participate and why? Ask yourself, do we really need to know? Kamala Harris participates. Go to Kamala Harris's Twitter page and you will see the answer. You're seeing Kamala Harris's picture on your screen. And now ask yourself, are you looking at a man or a woman? Well, come to think of it, we can't tell. Let's check her Twitter bio. Oh, she, her. All right. She's a woman. How about Elizabeth Warren? Is they a man or a woman? See for yourself. Are you confused? Well, Elizabeth Warren's Twitter bio helpfully tells us she, her, and hers. Elizabeth Warren is a woman, ladies and gentlemen, according to Twitter. We haven't checked Wikipedia, but she's telling us. Sandy Cortez, also a woman, according to her own Twitter page. In case you were wondering, how confused were you? Pete Buttigieg, a man, he uses he, him pronouns. See, it's really clear. They all do. Well, not all of them. Actually, the one kind of big-time public figure in the Democratic Party who does not include clarifying sex pronouns in her Twitter bio, Michelle Obama. Huh. Well, we told you a story several weeks ago about a military base in the United States, not dedicated to defending the country from foreign invaders. No, we've had 5 million of those. But that has spent its time trying to punish a local mother who complained about her kid's school on Facebook. Well, it turns out to be a little more ominous than you thought. The military was far more deeply involved in censorship and controlling the domestic population than we even imagined. We've got an update next. Decided that the real purpose of the U.S. military is not to protect the country from invaders, but to protect the people in charge from the U.S. population. Back in December, we told you about a mother in New Jersey called Angela Redding. She'd gone on Facebook to complain about her children's elementary school. She wanted the school to stop sexualizing her children. In response to this constitutionally protected speech, a military officer in New Jersey called Major Chris Schilling from Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst publicly declared Redding was a threat to her community, an enemy. Now we're learning that the entire military base was involved in this political suppression. Angela Redding joins us tonight to explain. Angela, thanks for coming back. What have you learned?
Thank you for having me. So yeah, the last time I was on, I assumed, I think I said on air, that this was one rogue military official and a police chief. Come to find out, after a government document request, I was able to see behind the scenes that 16 government officials were actively trying to suppress my speech, call me a terrorist and extremist, and even reported me to Homeland Security, the counterterrorism unit at our state police, and the county prosecutor's office. It's absolute insanity. And it's scary that our government is treating law-abiding citizens this way.
The U.S. military should never, this is the last thing the U.S. military should ever do. Has anyone apologized to you from the base?
Absolutely not, and all of them are still in their positions.
Every single officer involved in this should be fired immediately. And I'm so sorry for you, but I appreciate the update. Angela Redding for us tonight. Thank you. Tucker Carlson, happy Tuesday. Another day of rumors and thinly sourced news stories. Ooh, what's new? These about when and where Donald Trump will be arrested, fingerprinted, and photographed against a cinder block wall for his mugshot. How much of this is true? Once again, we cannot say. Here's what we know. A Soros-funded prosecutor in New York, a man who ran on the promise to indict Trump, seems to be working hard to indict Trump, indicting him for a crime that no one even pretends is a crime, including the federal agency that has already investigated it and declared it not a crime. So in Manhattan tomorrow, what will certainly be an overwhelmingly liberal grand jury will meet, and unless something unexpected happens, Democrats will have taken the unprecedented step of using a corrupt justice system to take out the frontrunner in the Republican presidential field in a presidential race. And if that happens, America will never be the same. You've got to hope that for the sake of the country, the Biden White House, which will be running against Trump, will put the country above partisanship and stop this. That Merrick Garland at DOJ will issue a very public statement saying that this is wrong, which it is, and therefore preserve for our grandchildren our justice system. As of tonight, that doesn't seem to be happening. In fact, as of tonight, it's not just Trump who is the target of this, it's Trump's voters. The Biden administration is in the process of preparing yet another law enforcement dragnet of more than 1,000 nonviolent January 6 protesters. These are not people who broke windows or tussled with cops. These are patriotic Americans who dared to question the official story of the 2020 election. They watched with the rest of us as COVID was used as a pretext to eliminate longstanding barriers to voter fraud. They saw Democratic partisan Mark Zuckerberg spend nearly $500 million to influence the mechanics of voting, including in critical swing states. Nevertheless, as they watched the news on the night of November 3rd, Trump seemed to be winning re-election. And then they woke up, and smug TV anchors are telling them that actually a senile man who refused to campaign had won the biggest landslide in American history. He got 15 million more votes than Barack Obama. They were skeptical. They did not buy that. So they went to Washington to protest. They thought that was their right. And as a result, January 6th. That was more than 2 years ago. What did these people look like? Well, one of them was Jacob Chansley. We played you a video of him several weeks ago. They told you he was a terrorist. Here's what he was actually doing inside the Capitol. Here's video of Chansley in the Senate chamber. Capitol police officers take him to multiple entrances and even try to open locked doors for him. We counted at least 9 officers who were within touching distance of unarmed Jacob Chansley. Not one of them even tried to slow him down. Chansley understood that Capitol Police were his allies. Video shows him giving thanks for them in a prayer on the floor of the Senate. Watch. So that's what Jacob Chansley actually did. There were people on January 6th who committed violence. They have been arrested. Jacob Chansley did not commit violence. By the way, he was arrested. He's spending 4 years in prison. 1,000 people have already been arrested for that. And most of them did what Jacob Chansley did. They walked through what we used to call the people's house, and some of them are still in prison tonight. So you assumed that ugly story was over, at least the law enforcement component of it. But no, it's not over. It's just getting started. The Biden administration has identified 1,000 additional Trump voters for non-crimes that they claim took place on January 6th, mostly walking as Jacob Chansley did. In recent months, according to a story in the Washington Post, U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, a willing tool of the Biden administration, has written to court officials, quote, alerting them that an additional 700 to 1,200 people may be charged stemming from January 6th. How many is that? Well, this will constitute the largest investigation in the history of the Department of Justice by an order of magnitude. This dragnet is so vast that prosecutors are warning D.C. jails and prisons will be overrun with prisoners. Prisoners you can, at this point, only describe as political prisoners. The Washington Post reports that, quote, in recent months, law enforcement and judicial authorities have engaged in discussions to manage this huge volume of January 6 cases without overwhelming the courthouse where pleas and trials are held. This is depraved and it's malicious. Keep in mind, it was just 2 weeks ago that we got thousands of hours of surveillance footage from January 6th, footage the government and the committee had hidden from the public and in some cases from these defendants in the prosecutions. They did this on security grounds. Those grounds were bogus. We proved that. The footage, when we saw it, proved the government had been lying about what happened inside the building on January 6th. And as we just showed you, they lied about Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon shaman. He was not the only one. But in the tape that we showed you just a second ago and 2 weeks ago, Chansley is seen walking around the inside of the Capitol with the police escort. Police lead him to the Senate chamber. Now, you were not allowed to see that footage because it painted a very different picture from the myth they had been force-feeding you on television for 2 years. Chansley's lawyers didn't see it, it turned out. The judge who sentenced Chansley to a life-destroying term in prison was not able to see it. So all that anybody knew was that Chansley had committed some sort of act of terrorism. They did not know the truth. Now that we do know, however, it's pretty stunning that they're trying to arrest up to 1,200 more people. Now, whatever you think of Jacob Chansley or Donald Trump, if you cared about civil liberties, you would be outraged by this. This is as grave a constitutional violation as you can have. In this country, the prosecution has to, for constitutional and moral reasons, turn over exculpatory evidence to the defense. That did not happen. This is wrong. This man is rotting in prison. His life has ended for a crime he did not commit and that he was not allowed to fairly defend himself against. But liberals didn't care. They no longer seem to have any interest in justice or civil rights. Just today, the MSNBC morning show was continuing to lie about Jacob Chansley, telling its viewers that he is a terrorist who does not deserve rights. Watch.
So if you lie about what happened on January 6th, if you try to redefine it as, and try to redefine Jonathan Lemire saying, oh, the weird guy wearing the horns, or I don't know who people were trying to say, oh, he was just a peaceful guy and he never walked through a window. Boom! A couple seconds later, we got reporters like Mr. Riley who will say, well, actually, look at this video. Here he is walking through a broken window.
So as a factual matter, as if you need to be reminded, what you just heard is a lie. Provably, Jacob Chansley did not walk through a broken window. He walked through an open door. And again, he walked into the Senate because the door was being held by a uniformed police officer with a gun. This footage is available to everyone, including the anchors on MSNBC. They know this, they're lying anyway. They don't care about what actually happened, and more critically, they don't care about the civil rights of the man whose life was destroyed. What you just saw is a measure of the total moral corruption of our news media and the institutions they serve in Washington. And it has implications for you. If they'll endorse the unjust destruction of one man, they have no limits. They will do anything. And now with these impending arrests, they're showing you what they will do. So if you support the wrong presidential candidate, you get arrested and don't get to see exculpatory evidence in your trial. Apparently those are the rules. But if you do vote the right way, you get paid. Democrats raise money for your bail when you commit violent crimes. They'll even force taxpayers to give you money after the fact. Hard to believe that's happening, but it is. The city of Philadelphia just agreed to pay nearly $10 million to hundreds of people who say they were, quote, injured in the police response to the BLM riots of 2020. Now, none of the businesses in Philadelphia that were burned get money, of course. They don't have rights. They're small businesses. They may vote the wrong way. Obama's DHS secretary is happy with that. In fact, he says anyone who supported the January 6 protesters in any way, even if they never stepped foot in the Capitol building, must be rounded up and charged with insurrection. Watch.
January 6th was the very definition of an insurrection. In my view, it's in the national interest that in prosecuting these cases, we call it what it was. You know, we read that the special prosecutor is contemplating charges for obstruction of the unofficial proceeding, fraud. This was an insurrection. You know, let's call it what it was. And the insurrection statute punishes not just those who participate in the insurrection, but those who incite it and give aid and comfort thereto. So in investigating former President Trump and others around him, I think we really do have to call it what it is. I think it's in the national interest.
It was in no sense an insurrection. It was neither armed nor organized. It was a political protest that at times became violent and morphed, unfortunately, into a riot. But it was not an insurrection. That is a lie, and they know it's a lie. These are people who believe the election was stolen. They certainly had reason to think that. But instead of convincing them it wasn't stolen, instead of calming their fears by telling them what exactly Mark Zuckerberg's $400 million was doing in our election system, instead of explaining that despite the fact we changed the way we vote, no voting fraud took place, instead of explaining why voting seemed to stop in some places, did it not? Why don't you tell us? Instead of doing any of that, as you would in a democracy, they told them to shut up. Everybody told them to shut up. Every news channel in America told them to shut up. And some didn't want to. So they went to Washington for January 6th. So here these people, having already figured out that, hey, we can use police power to crush the other side, are fantasizing about locking up anybody who protests Donald Trump's imminent arrest in New York. You almost get the sense they want those protesters to commit crimes so they can go to Rikers. Watch as the MSNBC panel derives what seems to be psychosexual pleasure from the possibility of another January 6th in New York City. Watch this.
We've got something called video, and it shows still that it was a riot, it was an attempted insurrection, and they keep going to jail. And so for those who think they're going to screw with the NYPD today, stay on the other side of the bridge. It's not going to go well. Even if they come into New York City and break the law, they're going to jail. It's pretty simple. Break the law, go to jail. There is no post-truth world when it comes to the court system, right?
Pretrial detention.
No, certainly so.
Yeah, Rikers. And by the way, one-way ticket too. Somebody said it. Rikers. Have a good day.
Over the long bridge there to Rikers Island. Yeah, there is certainly the NYPD specializes, particularly post 9/11, in real shows of force.
Some of us will never tire of hearing Joe Scarborough demand that we lock up people who break the law. The filthier you are, the more hypocritical you are, of course. But what's so interesting is how you never see these very same people fantasize about locking up, say, the murderers or rapists or armed robbers or people who push elderly women in front of subway cars who are making New York City unlivable. This is a city in which the homicide rate jumped more than 50% from 2019 to 2021 because of their policies. They don't care about that. They're not mad at the murderers who caused shootings to increase more than 100% in that same period. They're not mad that Alvin Bragg, their new favorite prosecutor, dropped 70% of criminal cases, actual criminal cases, since taking office, so that these same criminals can continue to terrorize poor people in neighborhoods where MSNBC anchors don't live. Try that in Nantucket and see if it works. Don't think they'd put up with it. So they don't want those criminals locked up. They want protesters who vote the wrong way to get locked up. Now, it goes without saying this is an inversion of what you're supposed to want in a sane society. In a sane society, you let elections determine who has political power. You don't fantasize about your political opponents going to jail. You don't want a real show of force to deter constitutionally protected protests, because those protests are the sign of a free society. You're proud of that. That people can protest. They don't have to be violent. They can say what they think. But that has changed over the last 2 years under the Biden administration. Here's federal prosecutor Michael Sherwin on 60 Minutes in 2021 in tape that we will never forget, speaking about American citizens, bragging about the DOJ using, quote, shock and awe to round up as many Trump supporters as possible to deter them from protesting Joe Biden's inauguration, which they have a constitutional right to do. Watch this.
After the 6th, we had an inauguration on the 20th. So I wanted to ensure, and our office wanted to ensure, that there was shock and awe, that we could charge as many people as possible before the 20th. And it worked, because we saw through media posts that people were afraid to come back to D.C. because they're like, if we go there, we're going to get charged. We wanted to take out those individuals that essentially were thumbing their noses at the public for what they did.
Shock and awe? Take out those individuals? Isn't that how you treat ISIS? These are Americans you're talking about, pal. That man in a free country would have no power whatsoever over his fellow citizens. And instead, he's launching a new war on terror against people who vote differently from him. This is bigger than Donald Trump, and it has been for a long time, and now it's escalating. So where are the Republicans, you wonder, the people you vote for, who are supposed to be protecting you from this, but the country from devolving into something unrecognizable? Where's Mitch McConnell, by the way? He's the lead Republican in the Senate. Where's Tom Tillis, the liberal Republican from North Carolina? Where's John Cornyn of Texas? Where are all the other Republican senators who said, shut up, you shouldn't see the videotape from January 6th? Are these people on board with arresting 1,000 more nonviolent January 6th protesters, their voters? We asked them. We didn't get any replies. Lindsey Graham's spokesman did send over this thoroughly humiliating response, quote, you sure put a lot of trust in the Washington Post. We take most of what we read there with a grain of salt. Huh? So the U.S. attorney in Washington announces in federal court that he's going to haul another 1,000, maybe 1,200 Trump voters to jail. And the response from people like Lindsey Graham and the rest of these people in the United States Senate, Republicans who you voted for, is don't worry about it. They're saying the same thing as a Manhattan DA threatens to put Donald Trump, the leading Republican presidential candidate, in handcuffs. This is shameful. They refuse to defend the Constitution or their own voters. And we really hope, through the electoral system, they are punished at one point soon. Steve Baker is one of the people who fears he may soon be targeted in this unconstitutional China-style purge from DOJ. He's an independent investigative journalist. He joins us tonight. Steve, thank you so much for coming on. Sum up, if you will, why you're worried about being caught up in this purge.
Thanks for having me, Tucker. Well, my January 6th story started on January 6th. I was one of those independent journalists who was there that day to cover the story, and of course the story developed in a way that none of us anticipated. I showed up with my camera, my tripod, and a man-on-the-street microphone, intending to interview people about their thoughts about what happened at the speeches there at the Ellipse. Well, of course, the story developed at the Capitol, and I was there, and I covered and caught hours worth of video myself, and then I also went inside the Capitol building because that's where the story went. I did no violence, I did no chanting, I did no parading or any property damage, but because my video and because of my subsequent stories have been used by news services all over the world, my videos have been in the HBO documentary, New York Times documentary, and others, and so as a result of that, I was eventually, I believe, targeted not because I was there as a journalist, but because that my story did not comport with the approved narrative. In fact, my initial foray into the weaponization of the DOJ against me was the FBI contacting me some 8 months later, and then right around Thanksgiving of 2021, I was told that I would be charged within the week. That's what they told my attorney. And then that never happened. 15 months later, here I still wait, wondering if those red dots are going to come through my bedroom window at 6 o'clock in the morning.
It's living in limbo, life-destroying, shocking. I apologize on behalf of the country. Very quickly, Mr. Baker, there were a lot of journalists, liberal journalists, in the Capitol that day. I think Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra, and I apologize if I'm wrong, but I think she was there doing a documentary as well. But certainly all the big papers had journalists there. Do you know that any of them have been harassed by Biden's FBI?
I am actually familiar with hundreds of journalists, both professional MSM journalists as well as quite a large cadre of independents. To my knowledge, none of the more left-leaning independent journalists have faced prosecution, whereas there have been quite a few of the more right-leaning independents who have actually been charged and convicted of crimes, even jailed.
Maybe John Cornyn could get on this tomorrow. It was busy talking to. It would
be great.
Yeah,
it would be great if our.
Yeah, if they could help. He's from Texas, as are a lot of the defendants. Steve Baker, I appreciate it. You're coming on tonight. Godspeed.
Thank you, Tucker. Appreciate that.
So the whole point of this exercise, of course, is not to, in some way, stop a future insurrection. It's to stop anybody who opposes Biden from organizing, ever. For example, the FBI recently labeled a veteran-led disaster response organization a domestic terror group. That's according to an FBI whistleblower. The disaster response organization is called American Contingency. Mike Glover founded it. He's the host of the Mike Force podcast. He's a former Green Beret and CIA contractor. He joins us tonight. Mike Glover, I appreciate your coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, do you believe that you have been targeted by the Department of Justice?
Absolutely. I mean, American Contingency started with a concept after the Seattle mayor told law enforcement officers to not do their job. So it's a forum of American citizens who are depending and leaning on each other in the absence of people, including politicians, and law enforcement agencies following the politicians and not doing their job.
So you spent most of your life working under arms for the U.S. government on behalf of the country. How does it feel to be targeted by that same government?
It's horrible. I mean, look, I'm an entrepreneur first. I mean,
Yes.
that's what I wanted to do after a long time of service. And it just sucks being targeted by, a country. My mom was targeted. My mom's Facebook account was deleted because the FBI communicated to social media and destroyed all the social media accounts. My mom came here from Korea, from meeting my military dad in the Army, and we're dealing with this. She's dealing with this. Her small beauty salon in Fayetteville, North Carolina is dealing with this.
It's beyond belief, and the fact that the people whose job it is to defend you and the Constitution are ignoring it really grates on me. Is there anything that we don't know? I mean, are you accused of an actual crime that you haven't told us about?
No, so the way it worked is I was labeled a militant, violent extremist organization. Thank God organizations like Project Veritas exist. They leaked this information. An FBI whistleblower came out and said, this is indeed true, and not only that, but the FBI looked into Mike Glover's records. I'm a retired former special operations guy, a sergeant major, have a impeccable career, have done nothing wrong, have never broken any laws, and they went into my career, went into my DD-214, went into my med records, and luckily somebody in the FBI, likely a FBI hostage rescue guy that I work with overseas, did a report and said, hey, this guy's on the up and up. I don't know why you're looking in this guy, but cease and desist. And that's how the traffic was verbalized on a forum within the FBI. So it's something that I thought was a rumor because I was getting suppressed and deleted, canceled off of every social media platform, but it wasn't. It was actually something that was true.
So do you recognize these tactics from the war on terror that you fought in?
Yeah, like if we're talking about subversion, sabotage, if we're looking at government entities going after its citizens, these are the first precursors to operational prepare the environment. We call it shaping the environment. And I don't like seeing it. As somebody who served a very long time, who wants to live in peace, many of my teammates, Tim Kennedy, Chad Robichaud, Jack Carr, we're all entrepreneurs that just want to live a free life and be left alone.
Yes.
And all of these guys have their own little nuances and stories of how they're going after, especially on social media, and it typically roots in foundation back to the U.S. government.
Shocking. It's shocking. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll tell us what happens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Former President Donald Trump could be indicted any day now. As we told you at the top, reportedly it is imminent. What would that mean for the 2024 election in which he is the front runner on the Republican side? And what would it mean for the future of the United States? Victor Davis Hanson joins us with that. So there are news reports everywhere today that Donald Trump will be indicted as soon as tomorrow, and apparently the NYPD is preparing for protests, etc., setting up barricades. On MSNBC, they're gloating, they're excited, they think Trump's a criminal, they don't care what the crime is. But the rest of us who can more coolly assess America and what our future might be if this were to happen wonder about the implications of it. But we're not smart enough to foresee all of them, and that's why we're happy to be joined tonight by a much smarter man, Victor Davis Hanson, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, who joins us now. Professor, thank you for coming on. If the presidential frontrunner on the Republican side is indicted for a non-crime tomorrow or soon, what will it mean for this country?
Well, there's two things that a republic needs to survive, and one is you have to have a judicial system that's not weaponized, and you can't criminalize politics. We're doing both. And what's ironic is what we're going to see tomorrow is something that was de rigueur. Unfortunately, it's been happening all the time. I can remember when Bill Clinton was facing Monica Lewinsky's testimony, and Vernon Jordan tried to pressure her to take a job for $80,000 something for Revlon, so she either wouldn't testify against him, or if she did, she would give favorable testimony. And Donald Trump was impeached, Tucker, the first time on the allegation that he used foreign policy as a mechanism to go after or to help him in the upcoming election. But Barack Obama in Seoul, South Korea just said in a hot mic that he told the Russian president that he was willing to dismantle missile defense, which would have been very handy right now in the Ukraine war, if Vladimir Putin would give him space while he was up for re-election. And that was about as quid pro quo as you could get. And so we look at all, and we have a president right now who's probably could face Donald Trump, and we have very asymmetrical treatment about the way the Mar-a-Lago raid was conducted versus the Biden raid. And it just continues that the American people are watching this and they're saying, these people don't even try to hide it. They're so asymmetrical. They're not applying the law equally. What are they afraid of? And I think they're afraid of that the majority of the people are not going to vote for them. And they have the institutional support. They own Hollywood entertainment, the corporate boardroom, academia, K through 12. But even with all that power, institutional power, they're still paranoid of what the people feel and what the people would do. So they have this weaponized criminal justice system and this criminalizing of politics. And I don't know how long it can continue and you can still have a republic, because the cynicism is at pandemic proportions.
Yes. The cynicism, I think that's so nicely put. You hear people who kind of believed in the system sort of dismissing it as fake, and that's not a good thing at all. Victor Davis Hanson, I appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So a lot of the news is pretty upsetting right now, and we're sorry to give you an OD of it, but we want to step back just for a moment mid-show and recognize that there is a lot of good going on in the world, despite the tragedies that happen in the end to everybody. And Scott Hamilton is a perfect example of someone who triumphed over the bad to find the joy. He, of course, is an Olympic gold figure skater. He won the gold in 1984 at the Olympics. And he told us about how the sad things in his life, losing his mother to cancer, getting sick himself, in fact turned out to be some of the greatest, most clarifying things in his life. We spoke to him for a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson Today. Here's part of it.
I turned 18, I was sponsored, and I had my very own first apartment. Okay, do the math. How did that go?
Probably not that.
No, it was awful. It was bad. I don't even know how I made it to nationals that year. I was distracted. I wasn't trained properly.
Of course.
I didn't have the structure I had the year before. That would be the last time my mom would ever see me skate in competition.
Oh gosh.
So she lost her battle, and she was the person in my life I loved the most. And how am I going to do this without her? I had to figure out what to do, so I just went on a walk in my backyard. And in that walk,